So we're going to dive right into Chapter 1 of your Iannucci and Howerton textbook. The learning objectives for this chapter is going to be to define the key terms associated with dental radiation, summarize the importance of dental images, you list the use of dental images, summarize the discovery of X-radiation, and recognize the pioneers in dental X-radiation and their contributions and discoveries. To list the highlights in the history of X-ray equipment and film, list the highlights in the history of dental radiographic techniques, and list the highlights in the history of digital imaging. What is the purpose of this chapter? It's going to be to introduce basic dental radiography terms. We're going to detail the importance of dental radiographs, and we're going to review the history of X-radiation. It's important because the dentist relies on the dental radiographer to capture a radiographic image as accurately as possible in order for a proper diagnosis to be made. The dental radiographer will also be responsible for documenting the number and type of radiographs taken in the patient's clinical record under a dated entry. It is important that the dental radiographer have a thorough understanding of X-radiation, since X-ray images are a necessary component of patient care. All right, so here are the terms that we're going to be using for the rest of this course. There is radiation, which is a form of energy carried by waves or a stream of particles. I want you to keep that in mind, that any form of energy carried by waves or a stream of particles is radiation. It may not be penetrating or ionizing radiation, but it is still radiation. Then there is X-radiation, which is a high-energy radiation produced by the collision of a beam of electrons with a metal target in an X-ray tube. Then there is the X-ray, which is a beam of energy that has the power to penetrate substances and record image shadows on photographic film. The difference between radiation and an X-ray is that the X-ray has enough power to penetrate substances and to record that image shadow on the photographic film. Radiology is the science or study of radiation as used in medicine, a branch of medical science that deals with the use of X-rays, radioactive substances, and other forms of radiant energy in the diagnosis and treatment of disease. A radiograph is a picture. It's a visible photographic record on film produced by the passage of X-rays through an object or body. This is also called an X-ray film. Sometimes in practice, it's going to be called an X-ray, which is not the correct term. An X-ray is a term that refers to the beam of energy. A radiograph is the term used for the picture that the X-rays produce on a receptor. A dental radiograph, I'm sure you can connect the dots here, is that it is a photographic image produced on film by the passage of X-rays, but only here that it has to go through teeth and related structures. Radiography is the art and science of making radiographs by the exposure of film to X-rays. I've never really considered myself an artist because I take radiographs, but I guess I am. I'm an artist taking these radiographs. The dental radiography is the production of radiographs of the teeth and adjacent structures by the exposure of film to X-rays. A dental radiographer is any person who positions, exposes, and processes X-ray film, or dental radiographer/artist. All right, so an image is a picture or likeness of an object. The things that we look at when we are looking at our radiographs are the images of the teeth that we took the radiograph of. The image receptor is going to be the recording medium. So whatever we place inside the mouth or that goes around the person's head that is going to record is going to be the image receptor. It includes the X-ray film, the phosphor plate, or a digital sensor. And then dental imaging is the creation of digital, print, or film representations of anatomic structures for the purpose of diagnosis. The importance of dental images, and I cannot stress enough how important dental images are. In dentistry, dental images enable the dental professional to identify many conditions that may otherwise go undetected and to see conditions that cannot be identified clinically. So when you have a patient who, for whatever reason, would like to refuse taking radiographs, then it is important to stress to that individual that there are many dental diseases and conditions that have no clinical signs or symptoms and that can go undetected without the use of dental images. So when we take dental images, we are using them to detect lesions, to confirm or classify suspected disease that maybe we saw clinically and now we want to make sure, to localize lesions or foreign objects. Typically, that's done more in medicine than dental, but it happens in dental. Provide information during dental procedures. So sometimes, if a dentist is doing a root canal, they will place the file, take the x-ray, and it's going to give them information about how far along in that treatment they are. To evaluate growth and development, we take x-rays on kiddos to see, not only are the teeth it all there, that they have all of their permanent teeth that are going to grow in, but also to see if they're missing any, right? We want to illustrate changes secondary to caries like periodontal disease and trauma. We want to document the condition of a patient. When we have a radiograph and it shows a certain disease, and then our notes say that the patient has that disease, it allows another second opinion or another expert to take a look at that radiograph and confirm that that diagnosis really did happen or that diagnosis was correct, to aid in the development of a clinical treatment plan. So often we use our x-rays, we're looking to see if that cavity is deep enough in order to need a root canal and crown, or is it shallow enough or to just do a filling. We're looking to see where that bone level is. We're looking to see if there's any of that radiographic calculus to find out what kind of cleaning we might be doing on that patient. So if we didn't have radiographs, we can't just look in the mouth and say, oh yeah, that cavity is deep enough that it's going to need this and this and this. Dentists should have to weigh the benefits of taking these dental images against increasing a patient's exposure to radiation, because we do want to expose our patients as little as possible while still being able to do all of the things that we have here. These are all important factors to keep in mind when your patient is against having those dental x-rays taken. Okay, so now we're going to get into the history of x-rays. The discovery of X-rays goes to a guy named Wilhelm Conrad Roentgen. Was a Bavarian physicist, and in 1895, on December 22nd, he was in his lab experimenting with vacuum tubes and fluorescent screens, which was quite a cutting-edge technology at the time. And he noticed that when he turned the vacuum tube on, that the screen that was several feet away was glowing. And when he turned it off, it would stop glowing. And then when he turned it back on, it would start glowing again. And he determined that there was some type of mysterious ray that was causing the screen to glow. And so what do when we have something we don't know? We label it X, right? After he replaced the fluorescent screen with photographic plates, he was able to permanently capture images based on whatever he put in front of the photographic plate. He would see the outline or the shadow of it on the photographic plate, and then it would be permanently captured on there. And then, of course, what do you do when you are messing around with some kind of unknown ray? You place your hand's wife on the photographic plate and then expose her to those x-rays for a full 15 minutes to show that he's able to permanently capture the outline of her bones. And this event goes down as the first ever radiograph of the human body. You can find this in your textbook on figure 1-1 and then 1-2. Oh, I'm not sure how on that last slide I forgot to mention, but the red letters, the NBQ, those stand for National Board Question, and that information will probably show up on your national board exam. So I would take note of those things. This picture here is of Conrad's wife's hand. Her name was Bertha, and there's a rumor that says that when she saw this image after taking that x-ray with him, that she was so freaked out and thought that it looked like death that she never went into his study again. Although there's I don't know if that's true. All right, so before Roentgen, there was Henrik Geisler in 1838, and he built the very first vacuum tube, which Roentgen then used, obviously, to discover X-rays. But he wouldn't have been able to do it without Henrik Geisler here. And Geisler's tubes are actually used in the work which makes neon lighting possible. So thank you, Henrik Geisler, for neon. Then Johann Hittorf in 1870, and he used the vacuum tube to study fluorescence. Hittorf becomes the first scientist to calculate the electric capacity of ions, which is very important in understanding how those ions are able to take radiographs. So thank you to Hittorf as well. And then in the late 1870s, we have William Crookes, and he discovers that cathode rays were actually streams of charged particles. Crookes ends up making many discoveries with these vacuum tubes and cathode rays, and they end up leading to the discovery of the TV tube, which I think is pretty important for every screen that you've ever looked at. Then we have Philip Leonard, and he in 1894 discovered that cathode rays could penetrate a thin window of aluminum. And this is important because aluminum is actually used to filter X-rays so that only the very fast, more penetrating rays are able to get through, which we'll get into more in chapter 2. But that X-rays were able to penetrate aluminum foil and cathode rays are able to penetrate aluminum foil is a very important discovery. And then it's thought that Philip Leonard would have discovered X-rays if he had just been using a little bit more sensitive fluorescent screens. So that's a hard pill to swallow there for poor Philip Leonard. All right. So then after Roentgen's discovery of these X-rays, and that picture of his hand's wife, the image of his hand's wife, was actually taken on December 22nd. Then he puts together a presentation and he presents to a board of physicists on January 1st of 1896. And after that, X-rays and the experimentation with X-rays really takes off that year. So then we have Otto Walkhoff in 1896, and he actually uses the X-ray to make the very first dental radiograph. Walkhoff produces this first dental radiograph by exposing his own mouth on a photographic plate for 25 minutes. Like, I don't know about you guys, but we would have a very hard time convincing patients to take radiographs if we were going to have to take 25 minutes every single one. I'm glad things have sped up a bit. Then we have W.J. Morton in 1896, who makes the first radiograph using a skull. This is, of someone other than themselves. Morton, who was working in team with Thomas Edison, actually was one of the first ones to say that there could be potentially adverse effects of X-rays, but everyone kind of just ignored him at that point. And then we have C. Edmund Kells in 1896 as well, and he exposes the first dental radiograph of another person, and he was actually living in the United States. And Kells actually, because of how many x-rays he was taking of his own body, develops cancerous tumors, and they actually lead to the loss of his fingers, his hand, and then later his arm. So I'm glad that Morton was on track with trying to figure out the dangers of x-rays. Next, we have William H. Rollins, and he is the first one to develop a dental x-ray unit because not only was he a practicing dentist at the time, but he also had a medical degree from Harvard University. While he was experimenting with his first x-ray dental unit, he actually burns his hand using x-rays, and that sparks an interest in maybe the effects that x-rays might be having on the human body. And then in 1901, he writes the very first paper on the dangers of X-rays. And as you can tell, in 1895 is the discovery. So then it takes a full 6 years before anyone really thinks like, hey, maybe these are not a good idea to be just blasting around liberally. So he's the one who thankfully started looking at maybe the effects that they were having on the human body. Next, we have Frank Van Wert, and he is the first one to use film in intraoral radiography. He is, at the time, he was working with Eastman Kodak, and they are the ones. Kodak is the one who has the honor of being the one to make the first intraoral film. Then we have Howard Riley Rapier, and he establishes the very first college in radiography for dental students, or I'm sorry, the first college course in radiography for dental students. And because of this, he is given the title of Professor of Radiology, and he ends up writing many textbooks regarding radiology, or I'm sorry, radiography, and then he is the one who introduces the bite wing technique, which is something that we absolutely use on a daily basis as dental hygienists. Then in 1913, William Coolidge develops the first hot cathode X-ray tube, and then this becomes the prototype for all modern X-ray tubes. Coolidge receives a U.S. patent to allow for the tungsten filament, which is located inside the X-ray tube, and it allows for a better visualization of dental anatomy and tumors. We'll find out in the next chapter that when you can heat up the filament that is going to be sent, it heats up more X-rays or heats up more of those electrons and shoots them towards that tungsten target. And then that is what gives us a higher milliamperage. And that milliamperage is what gives us a better diagnostic quality of our X-rays. And so this sort of hot cathode ray sets the standard for X-rays for the rest of the time that we'll be taking them. Then Victor X-Ray Corporation, the company in 1923, ends up immersing that vacuum tube inside oil, which allows the outside of the machine to stay cool, and the oil actually absorbs a lot of that heat. In 1957 is when they make a machine where the operator is able to change the KVP settings. In 1966 is when they decide that a longer tube head beam will actually help with pointing those X-rays in the direction that we want them to go. All right, so the history of the film. From the time that X-rays are discovered in 1895, which they really start playing around with them in 1896, until 1913, everyone was hand wrapping these glass photographic plates in order to use them for film. But then in 1913, Eastman Kodak, the company, manufactures a pre-wrapped intraoral film. And you can see that little picture there. It is a slower speed film, but that's okay because it definitely revolutionizes how we go about taking X-rays. All right, so here is a summary of the history for dental radiographic techniques. In 1896 is when C. Edmund Kells introduces the paralleling technique. In 1904 is when Weston Price introduces the bisecting technique. And then in 1925 is when Howard Riley Rapier introduces the bite wing technique, and it's also when he refines that original bisecting technique and improves upon it. Next, we have F. Gordon Fitzgerald, and he is nicknamed the father of modern dental radiography because of his work in the introduction of the long cone paralleling technique. Even though it was originally introduced much sooner by Edmund C. Kells in 1896, he refines it by using this long cone you can see in this top picture. And in doing so, he was able to give a much more diagnostic quality to his radiographs. Hisatogu Numata is the first one to expose a panoramic radiograph. He's not really credited with the first extraoral radiograph because he places the film on the lingual surface of the teeth. And so Urjo Patero is the one who gets credited with the father of panoramic radiography because he uses an extraoral technique in order to take that radiograph. He also experiments with slit beam radiography, intensifying screens, and rotational techniques, which is what allows him to take a good panoramic radiograph. As many of you probably know, the panoramic machine actually rotates around the back of the patient's head. All right, and we finally arrived in modern dentistry. So here we see the history of dental digital imaging. Radiographs have been produced using radiographic film for well over a century at this point. However, traditional radiography is being replaced by digital imaging. Digital digital imaging allows for instant and easy transmission of images and electronic storage instead of having to use those pictures and saving them in paper charts. In 1987 was when the first intraoral imaging sensor was introduced. This is over 30 years ago, so as you can tell, it takes a long time for new things in dentistry to become normal. And then in 1989, there was an article describing direct digital imaging technology, which was published in US dental literature. We'll get into it more later, but digital sensors actually use much less radiation. It's at much shorter exposure time than the traditional film does. And so the future is in digital imaging. And digital imaging technology has become widely accepted and has evolved with improvements in the sensor design and supporting technology. Here at Concord, we use mainly digital imaging. You will take at least one x-ray with film, but that will probably be the only experience that you have with that. And then you'll do the rest of the x-rays you take here with these digital sensors that we have in clinic. Okay, and this concludes the lecture for Chapter 1. If you have any questions about this lecture, please either send me an email or it would be better if you would post in that question and answer discussion that you'll find under the Discussions tab. That will be the best way for fellow students to be able to see those questions and for everyone to get an answer all at the same time. Thank you.